All right, so I'm creating this piece with 16 gauge copper wire. I did not measure right here, but I honestly believe it is best to have too much wire than not enough, because you can always cut the extra wire off. So we'll start there. So when I create the moon man, I like to start with the legs. So I go literally to the middle of the piece of wire and bend them backwards, kind of touching each other almost. I use bent nose pliers for this. They do have like the needle tip. They're the perfect tool for me. So they help me get those perfect corners like so. And what I'm doing right now is just creating the heels basically of the feet of the piece. So I played with this for a second just to make sure that the curves of the legs were matching. Now I'm going to actually go in with my finger on this part and create the rest of the foot. So this is basically the curve where the toes are. And then once I do this part, it's going to bend and go into the legs. So when you get done fiddling with the feet, you should have something that kind of will look like this. All right, so now I'm going to come back in with my pliers and make a sharp little curve here where the feet are going to end and go into the leg. You want to make sure you curve the top of the foot. I kind of missed that part, but you want to curve the top of the foot. Here we go, like kind of like this. So you follow the motion of the foot and then you just put that bend there where you want the leg to start. And I try not to give them chicken legs. So this is what it will look like once you get that curve there for the leg. So next step, right after making the legs, you go basically straight up to the armpit of the little man. I make a corner here or angle, and basically just bend the wire, but you never want to overwork your wires. So if you're going to make bends like this, it's best to make sure that that is where you want it. Sometimes I don't always do that like this, but I try to be as gentle as possible. I actually started with the first piece. This is the second one, but on the first one, I definitely broke the arm. So the moral of the story is nobody's perfect. So right now I'm basically making the elbow, and that's just another bend there. And of course I messed up, so I'm gonna try to undo that mistake and redo it. But a simple curve like that is much easier to fix. I will say, if you're going to undo your wires, always try to flatten them out between the pliers. That helps a lot with regaining that straightness, that look of it not being bent. So I always try to grip that wire between the pliers to straighten it out as if it hadn't been bent before. All right, so right here, we're going to go into the hand. And part is a little tricky. I had to switch to a different tool, but I have no clue what these are called. I will get back to y'all with that. But this is going to be the hand on the left side, so it's not really doing anything. Moment of transparency. I actually hate the way this hand looks. I'm working to be able to get a better shape on that. But it kind of looks like a glove. But anyways, I use these, I guess they're like mandrel pliers. But I use those to get that curve. Then I come back with the bent nose pliers, try to perfect that hand. And then you're going to put a bend in the hand, the same as with the foot and the leg. You put the bend right there in the hand, which is going to create the arm. So really, guys, never be afraid to take your time. I did kind of speed this video up, a lot of spots in this video for sake of time. But never be afraid to take your time, play with the piece, get it exactly how you want it. All right, so this particular part is probably my favorite part of the whole piece. But if you could see, I started off on the arm like I did with the other arm, but you're actually going to make a little bend outwards, and then loop your piece inwards, and it's going to come back over the top of the original piece where you started. And this is actually going to be like the thumb turned inwards for the peace sign. So it's actually really easy. It's not as difficult as if it looks difficult. It's not as difficult as it looks. After that, I'm gonna fiddle with it a little bit more here, and just bending my wires out of my way. And then once you make that curve where the thumb is, you will bend your wire inwards. Give yourself a little bit more space, and then bend your wire inwards again. And you're actually going to create some fingers here. So when I make my fingers, I try to get a curve at the top of at the tip of the bend there, just so the fingers don't look, they look a little more realistic. And that's done by you basically bending your wires over and pinching them a little bit lower down instead of right at the top. So if you pinch them right at the top, you're going to flatten them. Pinch them a little bit lower down and it'll give you that bubble effect. So that's what I'm doing here again. I'm going to bend these wires inwards towards each other, leaving that curve at the top. And I also kind of bent that wire out, which will give you some more a closer touch once you push them together. I hope this makes sense to you guys, but this is how I create the piece. And as you can see, that second finger has a better curve on it than the first one. All right, so moving right along, we're going to, after you make those fingers, you're going to get that wire right underneath that finger and bend it outwards. This is going to give you the curve of the remainder of the hand. And you're just gonna bend it inwards like that. You want to get a curve. Again, I use my fingers to get those natural curves. And just like with all the other corners on the limbs, we're just going to bend this one right here. Again, these pliers are a godsend because I'm able to make these tight little bends and such like this. So definitely a must-have. Like I said, I'll get you guys like a list or a video of tools. So we'll just see how this goes. All right, so at this point, I have made the arm, and as you can see, it was just a simple bend, and then that piece of wire is going to go up, curve into the shoulder, and then I went back here just to make sure that it was up to par to my liking. So again, I was just fiddling with the piece, making sure that the base is what I need it to be. And this is clearly the gist of the body. Super simple, simple movements. If you play with it a little bit, it'll come to you. Trust me. So from here, I'm going to make the neck and head. All right, so here I'm back with my handy dandy pliers. I'm going to bend these wires upwards. So this is where the shoulder goes into the neck. Of course, I want to get these wires perfectly centered in the middle. And once I get those there, I'm going to do something cool with my pliers. But what I'm actually going to do is hold the wire with the tip of the plier and bend the wire around the head of the pliers. And that is going to give me a perfect line. So the neck is giving neck with the straight lines. And you can see that here. So definitely play with that step if you need to. You're just working the wire around the plier instead of using the plier to work the wire. And then here I'm going to come back and of course shape the head for my little dude. This is where I would switch it up. If it were alien, you would definitely go at an angle, going up towards the top of the head and then rounding. But since we're doing a moon man, we're going to do more of a dome here. So I'm just kind of freestyling, trying to get that perfect shape. And using my pliers to make sure that the neck is still giving neck, and the head is giving a dome as well. And then of course, when you're doing this step, this is still your base, but always keep in mind that once you start threading with a smaller wire from side to side, you will make your base give a little bit, but we'll get more into that. So here I'm coming in with a thinner wire. I believe this was a 22 gauge, either 22, 24 gauge, and possibly 20 gauge would be good for this piece. I think 20 gauge, it might be a little thick, because you do want to be able to control this as you wrap it. So I hope you guys are still with me. We are through the first part, and this is the second part, and you're almost done. So what I'm doing now is basically coming in with my pliers and anchoring this wire to little man's foot. I wrapped it about 2 or 3 times, and I'm just going to make sure to press the ends of the wire very close together and into the main piece. All right, so I'm going to speed up a lot of this process here. It's going to be really repetitive. So once you get the gist of it, it's super easy to do. There are just a few little pointers that I want to make sure that I point out to you guys as you're doing this. All right, so the first drop of wisdom is as you are threading the inside of your piece, or any piece, you always want to hold your wire super tight. But always remember that holding your wire super tight is totally different between pulling your wires too tight between your two pieces. Because if you pull really tight between the two pieces, you're going to lose the shape, which is what I was mentioning earlier. Instead, you just want to hold that wire as you're wrapping with your thumb, making sure that it doesn't move as you thread it. All right, so I cut a piece of the video just for time, but after working his little foot here, this is what I have so far. So once I get to this curve, I just want to show you guys again, you want to make sure that you're holding that piece right there in the corner as tight as you possibly can so that you're able to fill the whole space. If you're not holding it really tight, you will be able to see that your wire is not hugging the base wire tight. Most of the times, if it's not tight enough, it will slide. So there are a few different signs that show that you're not holding that wire tight enough. All right, so we're just time-lapsing right on through him. So where we are now in this piece, I've actually completed his leg. So when you have straight lines, they're super easy to do. Again, you're not pulling too tight between the two pieces, you're literally just going to lay them. Like, I mean, that's the best explanation I have, but you're basically just laying that piece in between, but you want to make sure that it's really tightly wrapped around the actual base wire. So that's what I'm still doing here. Just laying that wire gently in between and then tightly wrapping it around the base. Again, I've sped the video up at this particular part just so we can talk through it so you can still see what I'm doing right here. But when you get to these corners, kind of like where this foot is curving, where the leg is curving down into the foot, you will get to where your wire is starting to slide. Again, you want to just grip that wire like how I'm doing here. Sorry, I did not get good footage of this. But you definitely want to just continue basically what you've been doing to this point. You just want to hold that wire with your finger as you continue to thread through the rest of it. Another great tip as well is to use your pliers. I will start doing this soon, but using your pliers will help you get a tight hug. It'll make sure your wires are straight. It'll basically just come behind you and be able to get all those little spots that you miss. So definitely use your pliers. And I sped it up here again, just as I'm finishing the foot. Again, using the pliers to make sure that that wire is tight. It's not going to move. This is exactly where I need it to be. Once I get so close to the end of the foot here, I'm basically running out of space. I'm going to clip this wire and just fill in the remainder of that gap by just wrapping this wire around his little toes there. All right, once you finish with them toes, you should have a foot like this. I'm pushing those wires back together, making sure the foot is filled in how I want it. And I have this so far. So another big pointer when I do pieces like this, I never use really large pieces of wire because they're actually really hard to work with once you start threading them. And then it also depends on the type of opening you have. This one is completely open at the top, so it's actually really easy to wire, but I still like to use thinner pieces of wire. So what I'm getting at is it's always okay to end a piece of wire and start again, especially on this type of piece, because you just gonna tether a piece of wire down to where you plan to start at, and you can't tell because the whole piece is wrapped the same way. All right, so I tried to zoom in here so you guys can get a better view of what I'm doing as far as wrapping these wires. This particular spot is also a very tricky spot because your wires will slide since you're basically wrapping downwards. So I'm zooming in just to get a better view. So as you can see, I am holding the wire actually with my finger in the back. But I'm just making sure it doesn't move. Definitely applying pressure as I'm literally just laying that piece of wire over the other arm. And then I'm going to thread the wire. Actually, I'm threading the wire through the arm because there are not many other entrances. So when you do this, you also want to make sure that you're not bending your smaller wire too much, because same thing with the bigger wire, you can bend this smaller wire too much and it'll break from the tension. But as you can see, my curves are pretty straight there and pretty tight, so I just kept going down the arm, using my pliers to make sure they're straight, needle nose, you know it. And I'm going to use the pliers to get that wire straight. Once you get in the inside of this arm here, it is a little trickier. So the pliers will definitely come in handy. I'm even using the pliers to thread the wire through at this point because it's such a tight spot. So using the wires to make sure the wires are tight against using the pliers to make sure the wires are tight against each other. Using my fingers to make sure that the wires aren't moving as I'm threading. And then just making sure that you're paying attention to detail, which is one of the bigger things. Because especially in this particular spot, if you're not wrapping those wires tightly around that base wire, your wires will start to slide down at this point. And you'll have to go back and kind of tighten them up. You can tighten them up with pliers, but you will just have slack wire at the end. Again, right here, I'm going to finish that wire, make sure it's tight. Flip this little man over, tether another wire to his hand, and we're going to start this process over again. So at this point, we are almost done. We're just going to finish his arm, and the head is last. Okay, I said the head is last, but that's not true. Right here, we're going to just skip past the arm. It's the same process as before. And I'm going to tighten up the shoulders here, make sure everything is close and looking neat. And after doing the arm, I'm going to cut this piece of wire here and go ahead and end this piece on its shoulder. After that, I'm going to start with the neck. After the neck, I'll do the head, and then the chest will actually be last. All right, so we're going to go in with the neck wire. In this video, I did the wire over the top as a demonstration. You want to actually go between the neck pieces. So this is what I mean. You're going to thread the neck like exactly how you did the rest of the piece. From there, you're going to go up to the top of the head. This part is actually really hard because the wires... there's a lot of slack between them, so it's kind of harder to get them to stay where you want them. So I'm actually moving a little slow, but I just want to make sure that I am getting those wires wrapped tightly around the base, laid perfectly between the two pieces of head, and then, of course, wrapped again. And I want to make sure that I am pulling that not too tight to where it squishes the head in, but once you get it here, you want to make sure that you pull that and tighten it around. All right, so we're making progress. We are at the top of the head. As you can see, the head is hard to get perfect even for me, but you just want to make sure that you wrap it as tightly as possible. I mean, there's only so much you can do, and just making sure that you hold that piece down, double wrap it if you need to, make sure that it's holding. Now here, I'm going to take my pliers, and bend these wires upwards. This is actually going to be the part that hooks on the necklace. This part you could totally freestyle, do however you please. I like to keep it simple, especially for the mini piece. So what I'm going to do is just make sure that this wire is even on the top of his head. bend it a little bit towards me, and I'm going to take this wire here that I had left over, and I'm going to finish wrapping the top of the head, and then I'm also going to wrap these two wires together, and that's basically going to complete the very top of his head. Once you get to the top, you want to make sure that you wrap those two wires together. If you don't wrap those two wires together, his head will kind of be open at the top. So wrapping these two wires together will basically hold him together. All right, so after struggling to finish that wire, as you can see, these two wires are officially wrapped together. The head is completed. So I'm going to take that wire that I bent towards me a few minutes ago and basically create a loop and bend that wire back around. And again, this is going to be the part where the chain will go. I'm also going to use this part as like a second anchor to make sure that the head is completed here at the top. So after I get the nice shape that I want, I cut my wire, slid it through this little bitty slit at the very top that you should have, unless you're a beast and managed to make it all the way at the top. You still should be able to find a little hole there and wrap that at least once. I don't want it to look too bulky, so I wrapped it once around the top of the head and pinched that closed. My little loop is a little crooked here, so I'm going to straighten that as well. All right, so you should have one piece of the 16 gauge wire left. I like to do a little funky design in the back of the head. I want to make sure that the wire is not showing over the top of the head. But I'm just going to make a squiggle line here, and this will kind of give the head some substance so it doesn't kind of bend, or you can't like push your finger through it because it is a pretty big open space with the wire thread through. So I just wrap it all the way down to his neck right here, and I'm actually going to stop there. So on this next part, I sped it up really fast, but I just got another piece of the thinner wire and wrapped it around the remainder of that larger 16 gauge wire. This is the piece that we just made the little design on the back of the neck, and it was just kind of left hanging over. So in a second, you'll see what I've done. After I wrap this about halfway, I'll go ahead and finish it and clip that wire at the end. All right, so as you can see here, we have this piece with about half of it wrapped, which is the perfect amount. So next, I'm going to come in with my Moldavite bead. You can use any bead you like. You're going to get another small piece of the thinner wire and just slide that bead onto that piece of wire. This piece of wire you're only going to use to lock that bead into the chest part, so it doesn't have to be huge. So after playing with it for a little bit, I decided where I wanted to slide that bead in. So I got it hooked right here under one of the armpits, and then I'm going to wrap it around this other piece of shoulder that has not been wrapped just yet. So it's the perfect spot. Also, I wanted to point out that I am wrapping the piece of wire with the bead on it at the top of the body. I'm doing this because I want the bead to sit on top of the body I don't want it to be inside of the body or behind it. So wrapping it in the front is going to make it stand out, I guess kind of 3D on top of the body. And then it'll also fit perfectly for the next step. So what I'm doing here is just finishing all of my loose ends for the remainders of the wires that I have from wrapping the bead. Again, the bead is on top of the body, so the wires are wrapped down underneath the body. So I'm just going to find the perfect place to kind of tether this last little piece down. That way I know my bead is secure. And you're not going to be able to see where I finished that piece of wire. All right, so once I get done perfecting that, the insertion of the bead and the area around it, I'm going to go ahead and tighten this little wire right here, just to make sure that it's got a good grip, basically saying that this is where it's going to go. And then from there, I'm going to curve this piece down and basically create a circle around the Moldavite. When I did this, it actually did not create that perfect circle on the first go, which happens. So I had to go back and play with it a little bit. So as you can see, I got a wonky looking shape around my Moldavite bead. But rest assured, I'm going to keep playing with it a little bit here. And I'm going to get a shape that is suitable for me. And another big hint about copper wrapping in general is just the fact that you control the wire. The wire does not control you. You control that piece of wire, 2 pieces of wire, 3 pieces of wire, however many it is. You totally control that situation. So if you want that piece of wire to do something, you just play with it and figure it out. And you could do that. Don't ever feel like you're overwhelmed by what's going on. It's your creation, it's your wire, it's your situation, and you control it. All right, so once we get here, I pulled off that extra wrapped wire that I didn't need. And I'm going to clip this piece as soon as it comes over that shoulder. That way it's not going to wrap again, and it's actually going to lock perfectly underneath his collar. So once I do that, here I am just tightening that little piece there. I'm going to clip it again, make sure it's not exposing too much, and just squeeze that together. This is actually the last part of the piece, and this is the finished product. So thank you guys so much for making it this far with me. Please like, share, comment, and recommend whatever you guys want to see. I hope we can do this again. And this is the completed Moldavite Moon Man on a pre-night chain, also handcrafted by me.